Hello, everyone, and welcome to this inaugural podcast brought to you by the Ohio Mayors Alliance. This series is titled Local Solutions, Statewide Impact, and we titled it that way for a very straightforward reason. Ohio mayors get the job done locally every day and collectively make a statewide impact every day in the cities where we live, we work, play, get an education, and raise our kids. Hello to you. I'm your host, Scott Light, and you are going to meet two Ohio mayors in just a second who have given a collective nearly 50 years to public service. As a matter of fact, they were honored recently, and you're going to hear some of those comments from that ceremony in just a little bit. So without further ado, let me welcome Mayor Don Patterson of Kettering and Mayor David Berger of Lima. Gentlemen, welcome.
Great to be here, Scott.
Thank you.
I want to run a couple of numbers by our listeners here. Mayor Berger, 8 terms for you in Lima, and Mayor Patterson, 4 terms for you as mayor, and then you also served on city council. I also want our listeners to know this. Yes, folks, we have a dedicated Republican and a dedicated Democrat here at the table, and I promise you, even though you can't see us, we are in the same room, yes, at the same table. So I want to start there. Mayor Berger, why don't you start us off? How have you been able to balance running your city and also being loyal to your political party?
Well, actually, the City of Lima has a charter which specifies that our elections are nonpartisan. So when I originally ran in 1989, I made a special effort to recruit from both parties and built an election team that was successful. I stood for elections 15 times in those 32 years, always maintaining a bipartisan approach, and I believe because of that, we stayed focused on solutions, on being practical, not being ideological, and ultimately we got things done.
Much like David, our charter is nonpartisan, so we don't run with a D or an R behind our name. I would say most of our residents don't know what party we're affiliated, because as David said, our residents want to see results, whether they're Democratic results or Republican results. I had a tradition when I was mayor and a new council person came on. I would tell them to meet me at the city offices of the first council meeting and take them out to the street. And I'd point to the pothole there, and I said, well, when you can tell me if that's a Democratic or Republican pothole, you can bring it into that building. So we don't get into, and David, we don't get into a lot of that. Our residents expect us to do our job, and that's what we do. And I don't, at least, get involved, even though I'm on the Republican side of the aisle. I don't get into that bashing, et cetera. It serves no purpose, and my residents look for results at the end of the day, and that's what I plan to give them.
Let's pick up on that theme. What makes the mayoral job unique compared to every other elected position out there in your mind?
Well, I think we're at the front line. Our residents see us day in and day out, and it's not like they're up in Washington and come home every other weekend or something along that line, and their party may be telling them which ways and what things to say. I think our residents expect us to look at the things that are problems in our community and find solutions and find groups to get the work done. And I think that's an important part that we feel as mayors in working with our community. And I can tell you, when we filled a council vacancy, I got a call from my party saying, why did you put a Democrat into that city council position? And I said, well, to be honest with you, I didn't know he was a Democrat, and it didn't make a daggone bit of difference because he was the best candidate we interviewed. So, and I think that goes a long way in us as communities being successful in what we do.
That's starting to kind of fill my humanity bucket, seriously, just listening to that anecdote. Mayor, same to you, the uniqueness of that job.
Well, I think the mayor's position is, by definition, seen as the leader of the community. And so when issues and crises pop, they expect you to perform. But it also, in the day-to-day, it requires that you're paying attention to everyone that walks in the door. You're paying attention to the large and the small problems. You don't get to choose. In fact, one of the more exciting things about the job for me was always that it was like drinking from a fire hose. Mm-hmm. Every day, it's a flood of information, a flood of issues and people, and you're just constantly having to deal in a way that's seen as fair and even-handed, and as we both use the term, solution-oriented. Mm-hmm. You're looking for solutions constantly.
Another mayor who made history a few years back was Mayor Michael Coleman in Columbus. And I remember I had a chance to interview him as he was leaving office, and he said, what Bill Clinton has long said many years ago still holds true when he said, he was paraphrasing Clinton, but Clinton said, in all of politics, it's mayors and governors who get the work done. You think that's about right?
I do. I think that there's a real agency that's connected substantively with that position. And, the council is, at least for the city of Lima, is a solely legislative body. They're prohibited by the city's charter from actually taking executive actions. The mayor, by definition, is the executive and is expected to perform and to ultimately deliver results. And so I do think that that's an enormous expectation, and if you don't perform and do it well, you can expect to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, we're at the front line, the battle line, if you will, of things that our residents are affected in their daily lives. It's a lot different than a state and a federal level, and I think they look for us to perform. And I think over the years, as Mayor Coleman said, we've come through for them years and upon years, and they continue to look to us for answers. As mayor, as David had said, we get credit for a lot of the things, but it's a team effort that our staff and our volunteers put together and do for our community that make our communities special. Mm-hmm. And so yes, I think we do. We are the front line, and I think in part we get the job done. And so when you have a situation where people are getting things done versus just talking about things that they would like to see done, I think that's a big deal, and I think our residents recognize that.
Speaking of being on the front lines, you both have been on the front lines of a global pandemic the last couple of years. I remember talking to Kerry McCarthy, who heads the Ohio Mayors Alliance, and he said, Scott, he said, our mayors are at the table with the DeWine administration, and this was back when COVID cases were surging even more, and he said, we're not talking about policies that have a D or an R by them. This is about getting the work done and working with our mayors. Do you both have some anecdotes of what that was like?
Well, I think Kerry was accurately portraying what took place in the initial months between the Mayors Alliance, and Governor DeWine and his team. There was a real, I think, coming together and a consensus about the need to act and act effectively. The flip side of that is, I think, I know I'm disappointed in my community in terms of the general sense of how this got politicized in ways that discouraged folks from getting properly vaccinated. I mean, for years, I've been on the board of the advisors for the health department, and I stand up year in and year out and talk about the need for vaccinations for whooping cough and for flu and for other kinds of things. And so it is breathtaking to me. It is disappointingly breathtaking to me that this issue around vaccinations for COVID has been so ineffective and so fraught with the kind of anger and upset that I look today in the Lima News, they're talking headline about the fact that our 2 hospitals are absolutely overwhelmed, and we're exporting patients to the Cincinnati area because we can't handle them. I mean, that's a failure on the part of our community, not the institutions. The doctors and the nurses and the cleaning staffs, all of them are doing their jobs. It is a failure on the part of our community to properly understand this challenge and to live up to what's necessary in terms of public health, which is to get vaccinated, to follow protocols, and to wear masks.
Kerry was right on when talking about coming together and working. Governor DeWine's office reached out and brought us all in the beginning. And remember, we didn't know what was going on. I mean, all we had was it was a problematic type thing. It was spreading, and how do we get our arms around that? And I think as an organization, we were able to do that. Much like David, I'm a little disappointed in the fact that we haven't taken this to the level maybe we should have, and we wouldn't be addressing the problems now with a new variant that comes along. I always found it interesting that people that didn't, and I've always adhered to, if you didn't want to get the shot, okay, all right, I don't agree with you, but the untruths that were out there.
Right.
I mean, we every year we line up to take a flu shot, and the medical community has guessed at what the variant of type flu is going to be. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't, sometimes it's in the middle. Yet we have people that say, oh, this we don't know exactly what it is. We're putting this into our arm. Those are the same people I see standing in line in CVS and Rite Aid getting their flu shots. So I think it's been a little hypocritical. I think it's caused a problem that might not otherwise needed to be. But by the same token, I respect your opinion to do that.
Sure.
I don't have a problem with that, but I would engage you and try and convince you and look at the science and get it done, because I think it will protect us. I think we will get beyond this. I think we will find something. And maybe it ends up being like a flu shot where we have to get it every year. I mean, we get a flu shot because we don't want flu.
Let's go back in history even more, pre-pandemic, and talk about the origins of the Ohio Mayors Alliance, how all this came to be. Here's current Executive Director Kerry McCarthy.
When we first started this idea of bringing together a bipartisan coalition of mayors, it was Mayor Whaley, who said, we should really think about doing this in a way that brings our big city mayors together in a bipartisan way. And we went out and talked, and she said, yes, let's go talk to the mayors, but first we got to talk to Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley and get his input. And so I went down and talked to Mayor Cranley. He immediately understood the importance of getting the mayors directly engaged in their collective advocacy efforts at the State House. And he said, hey, look, if Mayor Whaley's for it, then I'm for it. And really off we went. And it was really those two that kind of helped, drive this thing, get it off the ground and drive this thing from an idea to a reality. And, we're just so fortunate to have those two great leaders who are also incredibly smart and bold and have a tremendous amount of, insight for how cities can better engage at the state and federal level. I'm just really fortunate that we had those two leaders buy into this concept and help make it a reality, because without them, I don't know we'd be in the same place we are today.
Mayor Berger, talk about OMA's influence now and what a podcast like this can show people how mayors get the job done.
I think that a podcast like this can educate the community, the larger community, on not only the importance of mayors and others working together in a bipartisan way, but also to understand that democratic institutions require public participation. They at all levels, whether it's in neighborhood associations or zoning boards or building commissions, those all require people, and Don used the term earlier, volunteers. All of us, we not only have paid staff, we also depend upon armies of people who give themselves and their time. There really are two organizations that I consider to have been absolutely critical to me and my community, and that is the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the Ohio Mayors Alliance. And the reason they have been so important and critical is that they are each deliberately structured around bipartisanship. They're each in their rules, in their governance, and in the way they conduct themselves. They are about the broad spectrum of persons in very different communities all across the state and across the country, coming together to find points of commonality and creating momentum for positive change. So they are, and I've been a part of other organizations that I would have to say have not been effective because they lacked that kind of clear definition and structure.
Well, I think when we put this Mayor's Alliance together, there was questions and possible doubts. Is this something we can work? Because we weren't seeing it being done on other levels. U.S. Conference of Mayors is similar, but this is more unique. I think it's a little closer because we know these cities that we're dealing with. They're not some city clear across the country and we can't relate to. We relate to the problems that these 30 cities make up. And I think it was so imperative, like David said, we all, as mayors, sit on more committees than you care to remember. And just to have or be part of another committee wasn't something I was looking for. But when we were talking about how we were going to do this and nonpartisan, and we were going to speak as one voice and be able to talk to our state legislatures as a group. Now, David would agree, we don't always see eye to eye 100%. So we do what you're supposed to do as elected officials. You find a common ground, if you will, or you modify it so that you kind of bring it in. And that's not to say you get your way every time. It's not to say that the other side doesn't get their way. But we always seem to find some place that ends up in the middle that helps our residents and helps the communities and the state as a whole. And I think because we kind of talk and laugh among ourselves, it's amazing how we're able to do this, yet so frustrating to understand how come the people here in Columbus and in Washington can't seem to find that common ground to get something done. Mm-hmm. There it's, my way or the highway type thing. And I think we found a little treasure here, and I think that it'll be beneficial to all of our communities, both in the near future and long down the road.
Let's talk about some of your respective accomplishments and some of your challenges. Mayor Patterson, when you look back at your multiple terms, can you point to one goal achieved or one accomplishment that you're most proud of?
No. And the reason why I say that is I could pull one out. I could say the complete renovations of all of our fire stations, or the purchase of what used to be the research park that was owned by a number of universities, but universities started putting research on their own campuses, so it wasn't getting the attention. So we bought it and have expanded and added to that. There are so many things that you can point to. I think while it isn't a hard type thing, it's the fact that we were able to listen to and work with the residents and get things done that were important to them, not important to Don. As a mayor, you have all kinds of things, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's public safety or parks or whatever. I mean, we renovated all 21 of our parks. We renovated all these things. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of is we were able to deliver to our residents the things that were important to them. So that was important to me. So that becomes my number one thing, is being able to deliver the items that they felt made us a better community and they wanted to be there.
Let me stick with you on a couple of others here. Can you point to something that maybe flew a little under the radar, but boy, it was something you put your shoulder into over those years that you're really proud of?
You're going to have to come back. I have to think about that one there.
Usually
it comes off, but I'm like, okay, this one, then that one comes. So, yeah.
I'll come back to you. You do some thinking on that. Mayor Berger, can you point to one biggie in your 8 terms as mayor?
Well, I guess I would have to really reflect on just how bad things were when I first took office. We were in an absolute terrible downward economic spiral. Rust Belt economics were closing many factories and good-paying jobs, and then we went through a defense downsizing period in the early 90s where we lost 9,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs. By comparison, today we've now got the strongest economy we've had in over 45 years. We've got downtown revitalization taking place, and within a 10-mile radius of Lima, we have 2,000 job openings, 60% of which are good-paying jobs with benefits. So, just in broad strokes, we did well to turn that around. We had to play defense a lot in order to defend some basic industries, and we succeeded with that. But I think overall that economic turnaround was significant and lasting.
You got one that flew under the radar that you're especially proud of as well?
Well, British Petroleum had owned what was the original Standard Oil refinery in Lima. It's the oldest refinery in the country. And in 1996, they decided that they were going to shut it down and destroy it. And I've worked with a task force, and we prevented that from happening. We found a buyer, we worked with Wall Street, and ultimately now have it in the hands of a Canadian oil firm that's invested $2 billion in it. So we've had another generation of Lima folk who have made really good lives as a result of that industry, and it's been a hugely impactful economic win for us.
What goal would you have on your checklist that eluded you?
When I ran originally in 1989, I ran on a platform calling for metropolitan government, and I worked for 10 years on trying to make that happen. Essentially, in Lima, the city itself is surrounded by both villages and townships that have essentially, as a metropolitan area, we've stayed roughly stable at about 83,000 people, but the city itself has shrunk in population, going from 52,000 to 36, because the new housing that's been built has been built outside the city, and so that's had the effect of sucking people outside the environs of our jurisdiction. And I worked for a good decade on, isn't there some way that we could create a new city, a single metropolitan area, and ultimately failed at that, because what it really requires is some very substantive change here in Columbus that could create a pathway for that to happen. So if you look at Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Florida, Lexington, Kentucky, Louisville, they all had state action that facilitated the creation of the metropolitan governments that they established. We don't have that vision in Ohio yet. And it seems to me that for many legacy or center cities like Lima, that is something that really does need to be thought about as to how to take what is an urbanized area and create one effective governmental structure that can serve all of it.
All right, Mayor Patterson, I'm going to volley it back to you on the accomplishment maybe that flew under the radar.
When I first ran for council, I ran because I was probably totally dissatisfied with the city of Kettering. I by trade, was commercial real estate. I own a commercial real estate firm, and I was building office buildings in our area, which we call Lincoln Park. It's kind of an entertainment with an amphitheater and walkways, etc. And I was building 2 buildings there, and it was absolutely the most difficult thing I had to do was dealing with the city of Kettering. And I can remember my best friend, we'd go out to dinner with he and his wife, and finally he said, Don, you got to do one thing. You either got to shut up about it or you got to do something. So I decided to run for public office. I never wanted anything like that because I wanted to make a change. I wanted us as a community to encourage investment within our community, encourage developers to come and build buildings, et cetera. And I didn't feel that was being done. So I did that, and I also came to realize the importance of tax revenue within your community and what great things you could do by bringing in more businesses or expanding existing businesses. And those were things that came along because I wasn't happy with having to work with the municipality. And I learned early on that we needed to do that. We needed to bring new businesses. We needed to expand, because if we could do that, we could do these things the residents want. We could keep roads and infrastructure and everything up to date. We could make changes within our community. We could add more parks. We could do whatever we wanted to do if we had the revenue to do that. So that, and I think most people, when they talk about what I've done, talk about the growth that we've seen in businesses and jobs. And it was somewhat of a selfish reason, because I figured out that the more I had with businesses, the more I could do for residents, and that was important.
What was the toughest day on the job?
Oh, the toughest day I think is, when something happens, and David knows we just lost a business that left that was unknown. They just called up in the morning at 8:15 and said, oh, by the way, we're going to be telling our employees, 650 of them, that we're going to close this plant. And those are hard, not only because you lose that revenue, because I think the facility was an old GM type, so it was somewhat underutilized size-wise. The developer thinks he can bring in even more. But for those 650 people that were impacted, 2 months before Christmas, that they were going to be losing their jobs, it is difficult. There's nothing you can say. You can talk and help and work with them to find other jobs and to get through the process. But it's a difficult situation, and we're a community of 58,000 people, and this is 650, but it's highly impactful emotionally on you.
The worst day in the entire time I've been mayor was in January of 2008. We had a police-involved shooting where a SWAT team went into a house, and they were attacked by a pit bull released by a drug dealer in the house, and as a result of the confusion, there was a young woman upstairs with a baby who was shot and killed. And that began a series of issues in our community, unrest that attracted lots of negative national attention, as well as community dynamics that were really terrible for everybody. So after many years of actually working hard on issues of race relations, 20 years of that kind of disappeared overnight. And I think there's still lots of stresses and strains as a result of that, and the negative dynamics that occur in police and community relations. So that certainly for me is a very vivid, present sense of the most difficult thing I've ever dealt with.
Let me come back to Kerry McCarthy one more time, the executive director of the OMA. Both of you were recently honored at a recent OMA conference and luncheon. Here's what Kerry had to say about both of you and his relationship with both of you.
Mayor Berger, his knowledge of the issues that affect municipalities really helped our group establish our sort of policy footing. It's the issues that are hugely impactful for cities: wastewater infrastructure, water infrastructure, the things that maybe don't get a lot of headlines until they don't work or until they cost the cities literally hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's his knowledge of those issues that I think really stood out. But he's also just a great guy. I remember, one time being, it was late on a Friday, and it was just a frustrating day. Nothing was really going my way. And, he sent, I received a package in the mail and didn't know what it was. And it was from Mayor Berger. And I opened up, and it was a very nice bottle of Irish whiskey. And he sent it just to say thank you for the work we were doing at the Mayor's Alliance to bring the mayors together. And that, I think, just sort of defines what kind of guy he is. Just very thoughtful, very appreciative, and incredibly hardworking. Mayor Patterson, was one of the first Republicans to really come to the table. Former Findlay Mayor Lydia Mahalik was on the initial board. And then Mayor Patterson came to the table shortly thereafter and served on the board on the initial Ohio Mayor's Alliance Board of Directors from the very beginning. And so, his leadership to bring along the other Republican mayors was crucial to allowing this organization to establish the bipartisan credentials that we have today. The other thing I'll say about Mayor Patterson is, he was always provided great advice to me navigating this bipartisan coalition of mayors, which is to say, the Mayor's Alliance needs to stay focused on the issues that affect our cities. We can't spread ourselves too thin, and we have to really focus on the areas of commonality between the different cities in our group. And that has always been sort of a guide star for me. And lastly, he's just, an incredibly warm and caring human being, probably one of the nicest people I've ever been around, much less elected officials. And, he is so proud of the city of Kettering and all that he has done, and as much as that city has grown and developed throughout the course of his career. And he has every right to be proud. It's a great community. And I've had the opportunity to visit the community with him, travel around. He's taken me around and shown me all the things that make Kettering great. And we're going to miss him tremendously in the Mayor's Alliance, but he's just really a wonderful person and just a great leader.
As you are both getting ready, to leave, legacy is a word that sometimes gets overused. But when I'm sitting across from people who have 50 years collective of public service, that is indeed what we're talking about here. Mayor Berger, what do you hope your legacy is, whether it's 5 years down the road or 50 years down the road?
Well, I hope that the community continues to kind of build on the momentum of positive change that's underway, hoping that the national economy continues to support localized benefits like it has in the last half dozen years, and really hope that the kind of a bipartisan approach that I've taken is one that survives the stresses and strains of the polarization that's currently underway, because fundamentally that polarization works at cross purposes to trying to get to solutions. And so I'm hopeful, because I do think that at the local level folks recognize the need to stay engaged and to be focused on positive change.
Mayor Patterson, what do you want the history books to say about you?
Oh, I think the same thing that every mayor that leaves office, that he left it a better place than when he received it. Even that being a trite type statement, I think all of us hope that. We want our communities to move forward. We want our communities to grow. We want our communities to get better. We hope we've left them in a position to take that forward. And I know when we have elections, we're working and trying to get people that can move our communities forward. I mean, 10 years from now, I want to be able to look back and say, I did a pretty good job, but that next mayor did a hell of a job. And I hope we've left them the tools and the enthusiasm, the direction, and all those positive things that it takes to move anything forward, whether it be government, business, whatever. I hope we've laid the groundwork and set up the framework for those people to be successful, because David and I would agree the residents are our most important asset, and we want to keep that and keep them moving forward and give them additional reasons to stay within our community and work within our community, invest within our community.
Whether it's your successor or maybe there's a young person listening to this podcast right now and they're thinking, you know what, I want to be a mayor one day. What's your best piece of advice for that up-and-comer?
Follow your heart. Whatever your passion is, you can't do this job without a passion. You've got to have empathy in this job. You've got to want to make things better. So I think if you're a young person and you think you want to be mayor, just follow the things that are passionate for you, the things that get you excited, the things that move you forward in your daily life or family life or whatever it is. Because if you take those traits with you, whatever those are, you're going to be successful. Your community is going to benefit from those things. And I think those are important things. This job will teach you a lot of things. So you don't have to worry about not having anything to become involved with. But you need a passion, and you need that passion to do whatever you're going to do.
Best piece of advice, Mayor Berger?
Folks should read the newspaper every day. And they probably need to read multiple newspapers to understand what's happening, not just in their own city, but also in cities around the state. Being well-informed, I think, is a fundamental foundation for not just being passionate, as Don is talking about, but also being focused on the kinds of things that can affect your decision-making, public policy, on the kinds of things that ought to be happening. And so having that kind of habit, literally forming the habit of being well-informed and reading newspapers is, I think, a foundational issue.
Let me wrap it up this way in terms of mayors bringing people together. You both have alluded to the polarization that's out there in politics right now, and there are some people who are saying, you know what, those horses are running free and we can't corral them, in the sense that we can't agree, we as a populace in America can't agree on a set of facts, whether it's about an election or election law or election results or a global pandemic. Maybe, just maybe, could mayors be the ones who again try to corral those wild horses that are running out there? Is that possible? Is that Pollyanna?
Well, I do think we have to expect that public officials conduct themselves that way. I mean, and I think through the Ohio Mayors Alliance, I think we do conduct ourselves that way, and we want to exhibit the kind of respectful engagement that public officials ought to be demonstrating across the board. So I don't think it's Pollyannish at all. It's how I expect myself to conduct myself, and that's. I think we all have to start from that point, and so it's. I do think there's a wave of not just discontent, but there's a malicious set of actors who want to foment the kind of disagreement that's there, and those folks have to be called out. Their behavior has to be asserted as not appropriate and not the norm and not what we expect. For the most part, I think I need to be able to charge myself with a standard of behavior that I think exhibits the values that we expect in public officials.
I agree. That's a hope. Whether it's a naive hope or not, time will tell. But not so long ago, I can remember when we used to be like that. So my hope is that at some point in time, we'll recognize that nothing's getting done. I mean, we used to be thought of as statesmen. Now we're thought of as politicians. Because at the end of the day, statesmen, you had your battles, you had your disagreements, but you came together. You went out and had a drink afterwards or whatever. Today, it's so visceral that nothing gets done. I hope that our youth is watching and seeing this and saying, we've got to do better. Mm-hmm. If you look at Washington, it's a mess. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They need to start finding some ways to get things done and take the politics out of it. It's like David says, you're just trying to embarrass the other side to get your point across. And anybody with any common sense has got to be looking at this and saying, are they really representing me? Are they representing the values within my community? How come I can't get things done? Can't they see this? It's as clear as black and white what's wrong with these people. And I hope, we as mayors deal with the public and understand. And this Mayor's Alliance, the Ohio Mayor's Alliance, has reinforced that we can get things done. We can move our communities forward, and we can become impactful on our residents' lives if we work together. And that doesn't matter whether you have a D behind your name or an R behind your name, because my residents want to know their trash is picked up. And they don't care if it's a Democratic mayor or a Republican mayor. If it doesn't get picked up, they're going to be called. And I think we need to get back to the basics of governing and taking care of our residents, whether it's on a local level, a state level, or a federal level, because they are miserably failing right now.
Are you sure you two want to leave? Because this has been an excellent conversation about problem solving and civility and bringing people together.
First of all, in answer to your first question about is it time to leave, I've always said that we have term limits in Lima, and it's called spousal consent. I no longer have her consent. So it is time to leave. It's time to hand the reins over and to recognize that there are others that also need to make a contribution.
Mayors Patterson and Berger, thank you for your public service, and also thanks for making a little history here as our inaugural guests. Come back anytime, okay?
Thanks, Scott.
Don't forget, this podcast brought to you by the Ohio Mayors Alliance, and the series is titled Local Solutions, Statewide Impact. And you heard a lot about that today from our guests. Again, to our listeners, thank you. We will talk again in the new year.